Welcome to another episode of Sports and Discourse with your host Derek Stevenson. And today I got a special guest caller, Shawn Gerton. Shawn, how you doing, brother?
I'm good, man. How are you doing?
Oh man, I'm doing wonderful, man. So listen, the reason why I brought you on the show, man, is because I had seen earlier on social media you had made a post about your greatest black quarterbacks, and I was already doing a little research, and I had already wanted to make it a topic on my show, and so I thought you'd be the perfect person to bring on here. And before we get into it, man, what I wanted to ask you was you aware that we had a black president in America before all the NFL teams had started a black quarterback?
Yeah, I think I have. I think I've heard it. And if I guess the only team that hasn't, well, before that, Cowboys only had one, and that was Quincy Carter.
Yeah, I remember that.
I think there is another team that hasn't started a black quarterback yet.
Well, actually, the New York Giants was the last team to do it, and they did it
Yeah, yeah.
in 2017. So basically, from the time that the AFL merged with the NFL, it was almost 50 years before every team had started a black quarterback, man. That's crazy to me, man. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there's a couple of things you have to kind of keep in mind, and you just got one, the evolution of the quarterback position, especially over the last 20 years. And, I'm sure we're going to get into it when we start going down the list. But I kind of say the grandfather of the Lamar Jacksons, the Deshaun Watson, the Patrick Mahomes, and the guys that we see in the league today is really Michael Vick.
Right.
Because and I know we can always go back to guys who made me an Eagles fan to begin with, Randall Cunningham and Doug Williams and those guys. I understand that. But, when you look at Michael Vick and the time he came into the league, or even when he was in college, they didn't know what to do with him. There was no offense out there to say, okay, how do we utilize this guy's talent? Yeah. And I think the thing with Vic is that he came around really 15 years too late.
Right, yeah.
But it's because of him that you had more kids growing up wanting to be quarterbacks and playing quarterback on Fridays. And you can ask anybody, you want to see innovative offense, check it out on Friday nights. Because what happens on Friday nights integrates into Saturdays, and Saturdays integrates into Sundays.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. Mike Vick in 2001, he was the first black quarterback to ever be drafted number one, and you're right. I agree with you. He kind of changed the game, and I think he made all NFL teams adjust, and they had to start drafting players built on speed first. Like that became like a priority when you was drafting, I believe, because of Michael Vick.
Well, and because I always say this about athletic quarterbacks, it makes you play 11-11 football.
Right.
You kind of think about this. When you have your Peyton Mannings and things like that, at the end of the play, you know where they're going to be at. They still going to be in that pocket no matter if they hand it off or throw it. They want to be in that pocket. They don't want to. But when you had a Michael Vick, you always had to count for him because he could take it to the house at any time. He could take a broken play and take it 60 yards to the house. So you always had to account for him.
Right. And one of the most historical draft years for the black quarterback actually was 1999. And it was Donovan McNabb and Akili Smith and Culpepper all going in the first round. But 8 of the 13 quarterbacks was black that year, man. And that was something special right there.
Yeah, and two out of your top 3. You remember, Tim Couch, Donovan McNabb, and Akili Smith.
Right.
That went 2 and 3.
Yeah, and Akili didn't really have as good of a career as the other ones, but he's still a part of history, man, and that was a big progression for black quarterbacks because before that, you know, I would say, well, we can go all the way back to the beginning, man. The first black quarterback that ever played professionally was Bernie Custis, and he played
Hmm.
for the Hamilton Tiger Cats in the Canadian
Okay.
Football League in 1951, man. And then after that, the AFL, they had Marlon Briscoe and James Harris, and that was around 1968 and 1969. And it was kind of basically perceived that the AFL, which was separate from the NFL at the time, was a little more tolerant of black players and black quarterbacks. And I think at that time, it was perceived that black quarterbacks might not have been intelligent enough to play the position, man. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, and they turned them into DBs. There was a lot of quarterbacks, and I'm sure we're going to talk about Warren Moon. You know, one of the reasons he went to Washington is that all the other colleges, when they recruited him, wanted him to play DB. You know, so no, he wanted to play quarterback. So, I mean, that was just a sign of the time, as bad as it was, for, black football players to play quarterback. So, and I think they missed out on a lot of great quarterbacks because they didn't let them play quarterback.
Yeah, more. I mean, Warren Moon. Imagine if he would have just had the opportunity straight out the gate to just go right into the NFL and play quarterback, man. Because um, basically the environment was just so bad that I don't even think Warren Moon was even drafted, right?
I don't think so, but I think if I remember correctly, they wasn't going to let him play quarterback, so that's when he went to Canada.
Yeah, and
And
then
if you take what he did in Canada, combine that what he did when he finally did get to the NFL, he's pro football all time leading passer.
yeah, man, he just was so good that they just couldn't deny him anymore, and they had to let him come over.
Right.
And actually, man, when they first merged the NFL and the AFL in 1970, I believe it was still basically it was still a pretty like intolerant climate for black quarterbacks. And I know the Washington Redskins owner at the time, George Preston Marshall, if I remember correctly, I think he was a known segregationist or a slash racist, however you want to look at it. And he basically he didn't even start signing players until the federal government threatened to block his use of the stadium, which was called the DC Stadium at the time. Man, can you believe that that was going on at that time?
I mean, yeah, you just look at the climate, and I think the Redskins was the last NFL team to integrate, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong on that, but I think they was the last teams to integrate.
Yeah, man. That's wild to me to see that the federal government had to step in, man, or they would have just continued to ignore black players, and it would have been to the detriment of the team because basically the NFL is pretty much at least 80% black, and in
Right.
1971, 3% of the quarterbacks were black, but now you move along a little further into the early 2000s and it had risen up to 35%, which is still kind of a low number, but it's a whole lot greater than 3%. And now, man, where do you see in the future? Like, can you see a future where we might have all teams starting a black quarterback?
Look, I can definitely see a future where you are going to have 60 to 70%. Now, look, NFL will always have a place for guys who can spin the football, and it
Right.
doesn't matter what color they are. If you can throw the football and you can be accurate and you can be on time and stay ahead of schedule, there will be a place for you. Um,
Absolutely. Do you think
so,
more quarterbacks that aren't black will have to play the game more like the way Josh Allen does, it being able to pass and run?
well, look, I think that is just the plot of where the game is. And as I said before, It's about playing 11-11 football.
Right.
And I mean, look, let's take you take somebody like Aaron Rodgers, and you couldn't tell me 5 or 6 years ago, and even today, that Aaron Rodgers isn't athletic.
Right.
He knows what to take off. He knows how to avoid tackles. So athletic quarterbacks have always had an advantage because it is an athletic competition at the end of the day. And the more athletic you are, the better you're going to be at it. So, and I think teams are starting to realize that. And, like I said, there's always going to be a place for big, strong arm quarterbacks, regardless of what color you are, who can play the game. And you are having more, athletic white guys, for lack of a better term, who are learning because these are the offenses they are playing from 7th to 8th grade up until the NFL now. And that really doesn't matter what color you are.
Right. So I'm sure everybody knows, but Doug Williams, the first black quarterback to ever win a Super Bowl in 1998. Why do you think, even with him being able to accomplish that it took so long for people to accept that black quarterbacks were skilled enough or mentally capable enough of leading the franchise?
That's a good question because, Doug, he got drafted by a very bad Tampa. Tampa Bay was terrible, and they were terrible for a long time. And then he went to Washington, and he played well. At times he got hurt. They put Mark Ripken in, and he played well. And that was also the same time that Randy Cunningham, kind of took the job from Ron Jaworski in Philadelphia. And, if you have never seen the Randy Cunningham play against the New York Giants Monday night when Carl Banks hit him and he catches himself on the ground, pops back up, throw a touchdown pass, do yourself a favor, YouTube that.
Right.
Randy Cunningham, Carl Banks. It's one of the most unbelievable plays in NFL history. And I remember hearing Bill Parcells say this once, and now he was talking about, when he said this, he was talking about quarterbacks that were, playing in this spread system. And he said this, about 19 years ago. We can only work with what the college gives us. And at that time, you look at the college game in the early 80s, most of your quarterbacks like Jamel Holloway, Harrison that played at West Virginia, they were more option type quarterbacks, which didn't really work in the NFL. So then when you had the Andre Wares in the early 90s, who was able to throw the football, or was in an offense where they threw the football. And it's all about this, at the time, it's all about the system that you played in. If you played in a system that would allow you to throw the football, you more likely got a chance than if you went to Oklahoma or Nebraska and you ran the wishbone.
Right. So, currently, we only have 3 black quarterbacks that have ever won a Super Bowl. Doug Williams being the first, Russell Wilson being the second in 2014, and then obviously Patrick Mahomes in 2020. What current quarterbacks in the NFL today do you think are going to eventually end up on that list?
Man, look, I think Patrick Mahomes may win multiple Super Bowls. I just think that highly of him. I think another one, if his situations get worked out, is Deshaun Watson. And you talk about the list later if you want, but Deshaun Watson, when everything is right, he's a top 5 quarterback in the league.
Do you think he's the prototypical quarterback going forward?
Probably so, because him and Patrick Mahomes, they're the full package. They can spin the football and they can take off. They can take it to the house anytime. So that's probably what you want. Where Lamar Jackson is just a freak of an athlete, and he can't throw the football. He's not as accurate as Mahomes or Watson, but the dude can throw it. But he's also such a freak athlete that he is the fastest player, and the way he moves, he is the best athlete on the field. So obviously, and with John Harbaugh and the way Baltimore likes to put a defense around and the way they run the football, Lamar's always going to have a chance.
That's true, man. And speaking of Lamar, he's one of the 4 black quarterbacks that won the NFL MVP. The other 3 being Steve McNair, Cam Newton, and Mahomes. Obviously, man, what do you think about those guys, man? What's the legacy that they left on the game?
Man, Steve McNair is probably the toughest guy to ever play in the NFL. I mean, you just think about, there were times where he was so beat up and they could go through the things that was wrong with him. And he has 10 injuries and he wouldn't practice all week, but that dude would show up on Sundays and ball. You know what I'm saying? I mean, he is one of the reasons the Titans were relevant and still relevant to this day is because of the way he played. And who was the other MVPs you said?
The other ones was Cam Newton and Mahomes.
And Cam is interesting because that dude is 6'5", 260. I mean, that's just a well of a man. And, he has such a big personality. And injuries have finally caught up with him. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with him, over the next couple of weeks with, going back to Carolina. But, I mean, that 2015 season, I mean, he had one heck of a season. You can never take that away from him.
Absolutely. And to go back to Steve McNair real quick, do you think that because the NFL still wasn't used to seeing a black quarterback, do you think that's one of the reasons why he ended up at Alcorn State in the HBCU instead of going to a bigger school?
Well, I think it was one of those things as we talked about before. You think of McNair is probably about my age, maybe a year older or younger. But at that time, I think he had offers from Ole Miss and Mississippi State, but they wanted him to play DB. They wanted him to play receiver or tight end, and he wanted to play quarterback. So he went where he had an opportunity to play. And, I mean, he was a Heisman candidate at a Division I AA school. So, and I think the pros see him and was like, what, this dude can play. Because, I mean, he was taking, 6th overall?
Yeah, actually, it was 3rd overall.
Yeah. So, I mean, he was a high draft pick. So they just saw a guy who could play football and play quarterback.
Absolutely, man. And for you to bring up the Heisman Trophy, so far the Heisman Trophy winners were Andre Ware, which you had mentioned earlier. He won 1989. And then there was Charlie Ward, 1993, Troy Smith, 2006, Cam Newton, 2010, Robert Griffin III, 2011, Jameis Winston in 2013, Lamar Jackson in 16, and Kyler Murray in 18. But there also was some other players that really played the quarterback position well in college that they didn't really get a chance, and they were switched over. One that comes to mind was Randall L. So what players, can you think of any players that probably missed out on the opportunity that probably would have been successful in today's game?
But Randy L was small, too. Randy L was only, 5'8", 5'9"?
Oh, was he that little?
I mean, I think that also played a factor to that. In one of the posts earlier, somebody mentioned Cordell Stewart, when he was slashed. And then, they finally let him play quarterback full time. And then, I mean, I think he's somebody, he played quarterback position fairly well. So, I mean, you can't really argue about his productivity when he was playing quarterback. Man. And I had to sit down and think about that. There have been some great quarterbacks, great college quarterbacks. One that comes to mind is Tommy Frazier,
right,
who you can make the argument the greatest college football player of all time. You can make that argument. and then he had the blood clot, so he never got the chance to play in the NFL. Now I don't know with his style translating to NFL. We don't know, but I mean he was such a great college football player in Nebraska.
Yes, sir. And when to go back to McNair again, when we were talking about HBCUs, I want to give you some names and see if you remember any of these guys. But these were like pretty notable quarterbacks that ended up playing in the NFL. Eldridge Dickey, are you familiar with him?
No.
Well, he played at Tennessee State around
Mhm.
1968, and he was drafted in the
Okay.
first round by the Oakland Raiders. And then another guy's Henry Johnson. He was 1967. He was in the 12th round, uh, but he did get drafted to the San Francisco 49ers. And then Henri Jackson, Alabama A&M, James Harris, Grambling, Joe Gillum Jr., Tennessee State, Matthew Reed, Grambling, Parnell Dickerson, Mississippi Valley State. Obviously, we know Doug Williams. And then Joe 747 Adams for Tennessee State, Jay Skywalker from Howard, and then Jawan Cedar from FAMU, and then Tavares Jackson. Those are
FAMU.
all noticeable guys, man. And I think sometimes they get overlooked just because of the level that they play in. But
Sure.
I think now with like what Coach Primetime is doing down there, I think some of these guys might start to get more noticed and get better looks for the NFL. Do you see some more quarterbacks from the HBCUs getting drafted in the near future?
Well, I think there's always that possibility, but the one thing about the league is you can be under a rock, and if you can play, they're gonna find you. They are gonna. I think they just do a magnificent job of just finding talent no matter where it's at. So I don't. I don't think that honestly, the level of competition that just gives them a little bit more to go on. But if you can spin the pill and you can play, the NFL is gonna find you and they're gonna give you a chance.
That's true, man. And we haven't mentioned his name yet, but another notable quarterback that obviously he didn't get the Super Bowl win, but we got to speak a little bit about Kaepernick, man. In 2013, he did take his team to the Super Bowl, man. He came up a little short, man. How did you feel about Kaepernick as a quarterback?
I think, and this got me in a lot of trouble. Well, a lot of people disagree with me on this because I think 60% of the reason Kaepernick didn't have a job was due on the field. I
Gotcha.
always said if he was Russell Wilson and took a knee, he would still had a job. There was a decline in production, and if you truly just sit back and look at it, it's hard to deny. I understand the 49ers wasn't the 49ers he took the Super Bowl, but in his last, I did some research on this, and don't quote me on these numbers, but like out of his last 26 starts, he only had like 5 wins
Mm.
or something like that. So, I mean, there was a struggle that they was going through. So, and he was struggling. When he got hurt, and they brought in Blaine Gabbert,
Right.
and he never got his job back. You know what I'm saying? I mean, we're talking about Blaine Gabbert, who wasn't a very good quarterback, and they went into a training camp the following year, and he did when he first took a seat, which is totally different for me. Those are two different subjects. You know what I'm saying? Those are two different subjects. But he did not beat out Blaine Gabbert in training camp. So, you know, you can't take away what he did in 2013 from getting to the Super Bowl. In 2014, where he took his team to the NFC Championship game, where he went to Lambeau, where if you remember, Michael Vick went to Lambeau in January and beat Brett Favre. You can't take away what Kaepernick did and going to Lambeau and winning that game. So, but it is such a "what have you done for me lately?" and towards the end of his career, he just wasn't as productive.
Yeah. Do you think he helped the progression of black quarterbacks, or do you think he might have set it back a little bit? And what I'm asking is, do you think that owners will be a little less likely to quickly pull the trigger on black quarterbacks, and maybe might think of maybe what they might call a distraction when they're drafting them, or do you think that they will ignore that altogether and continue?
No, I mean, I think it comes up to the individual. I mean, you just look at the quarterbacks that have been drafted since 2016. If you talk about Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, these are all guys that would, Lamar Jackson, Baltimore traded back into the first round to get him, and you look at the success that they are having. I mean, you can't just paint everybody with such a broad brush.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's going to be an issue.
Do you think that they do more do you think, I guess what I'm trying to ask you is, do you think when they're interviewing these guys, do you think they bring up Kaepernick in that type of situation just to see where the mentality is?
I want to guess not. I think they probably bring up a lot of things. They probably bring up a lot of things in your past that you don't know how they know that kind of stuff. But I don't know if that be one of them. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they might. I don't know, but it's just hard to say.
All right. And one more question about Cap before we get off of that. How did you feel about his comments that the NFL draft combine was likened to slavery?
Let me say I understand the comparison, but when you have somebody like Patrick Mahomes just signed a $500 million contract, that is a hard argument to sell to the masses.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? I understand when you take the visual of what they do at the combine, I understand it. But when you are able to set up generational wealth by playing a game, that your message is going to get, when you use those terms, a lot of time your message is going to be lost on the masses.
That's true.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I kind of feel the same way you do. I definitely can see the similarities. But I would say the difference lies in the fact that slavery is involuntary and the draft combine is
Right.
voluntary. So that's where
Right.
I definitely see the comparison, but I definitely don't know if I could 100% co-sign that. Um, but I'm glad that you brought up the money factor, because currently 4 of the highest paid QBs in the NFL are black quarterbacks. Mahomes being number one at 450 to 500, and then Dak Prescott at 160, Deshaun Watson around 155 or something, and Russell Wilson at 140. And how do you feel about that? Do you think all of those guys are like super deserving? Do you think Dak is a quarterback that's worthy of a 160 and potentially a Super Bowl quarterback?
Let me tell you how much I hate the Cowboys because I'm an Eagles fan. There should be enough there. But yes. I mean, when everybody's having this discussion last year, I'm like, you better pay the man, because franchise quarterbacks don't grow on trees. They just don't. And when you got one, and you got one that you feel like that you can build around, you better pay him.
Absolutely.
Franchise quarterbacks don't go to free agency. They gonna get what they want. You know what I'm saying? Unless they're in the twilight of career, like a Peyton Manning or something like that, or a Tom Brady. Yes. But a franchise quarterback in their 20s or early 30s, they don't go to free agency. So yeah, you better pay the man.
Yeah, and the perspective that I had on it was, I felt like Dak's rookie contract was so much value to the Dallas Cowboys that I felt like they owed it to him. I felt like they did the right thing by paying him. I think when you get that much value out of a quarterback on his rookie contract, I think you do kind of owe him a little bit for what he's already done. But I agree with you. I think Dak is worthy of the money, and I think if they keep building, I think he has a shot. I mean, right now the Cowboys are just really one of those franchises that lately they've always seemed to mess it up. But I definitely think they did the right thing paying Dak. And one of the guys that I want to talk about now that'll be coming up soon is Kyler Murray. How do you feel about him as a quarterback?
Oh God, he is just, he is such a unique talent because he is so quick laterally. He can deliver the football. Um, look, he's probably, you know, one or two in the MVP vote right now. His team is probably going to be a number one and number two seed. So, it just goes to show you that they have taken that Saturday football and they incorporated in the Sunday, and he fits it perfectly.
Absolutely, man. Could you see him eventually being on that Super Bowl winning quarterback list?
Yeah, and it may be more sooner than later.
Yeah, man. He is just one of them guys that's dynamic, man. Like you said, he he's just a playmaker to me, man. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and I feel like with all of the athletes being a little bigger, a little faster, I mean now the game is changing to the point where you have offensive linemen that are capable of dropping back into pass coverage. And I think with that type of defense, you almost have to have a quarterback that can move around and have a big enough arm to extend plays and find receivers, because I think now the game has just gotten so fast that the big slow quarterbacks, I think that time is just done, man.
Unless you can get the ball out of your hand really quickly, get it to whoever you need to really quickly. But it also goes by that even defense have seen these spreads and like, I gotta have just as many athletes on the defense side of the ball as they do on the offense side of the ball because I got to cover these guys too. I got to account for the quarterback. I got to have somebody to run down the quarterback or keep that quarterback in the pocket. Can't let a Kyler Murray or a Lamar Jackson get outside and then be able to turn the corner because they're going to turn into a big game.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so that's just where the game is, and that's what those kind of quarterbacks and those kind of guys can do.
Yeah, and to go back to Patrick Mahomes, because we were talking about his contract. Do you think they overpaid for him as far as like do you think they hurt the team by giving him so much money, or do you think that it was just a great investment and it's going to pay itself back?
Well, look, I think, let me put it to you this way. I think Patrick Mahomes has the ability to go down as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. He's one of the three greatest arm talents I've ever seen. And when I say that, when I talk about arm talent, I'm talking about Dan Marino, Aaron Rodgers, and Patrick Mahomes. Doesn't matter if their feet are set, they can just deliver the football where they want to, as far as they want to. So, is he worth the investment? Yes. Now, I believe if they want to keep competitive, he's going to have to do what Tom Brady did throughout those 20 years. He's going to have to restructure and free up some cap money, which doesn't mean he's getting paid any less. They're just going to rework his deal where they can get cap money to get other players. And that's what he's going to have to do. And maybe eventually he's going to take less. But it's not going to be long, at $50 million a year. Probably the next 2 or 3 years, that's going to be third or fourth highest in the league.
Right.
Because that's just the way the quarterback market goes.
Absolutely, man. It's gonna be real interesting to see what happens when some of these younger cats deals is up, to see if they start breaking the bank the way that he did, because it's kind of been like a trickle down effect. Like Russell Wilson kind of started it, and now you seeing more guys and they're just getting like 150 plus, man. But I do think the boys all deserve it, man. Um, but before we wrap up, I wanted to discuss your list, man. So give me your list of great quarterbacks.
Okay, well, what got me, somebody in another group said, and I did a list probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And as I put, this list is very fluid. And I think this list will change over the next 2 years drastically. But and somebody was saying this. Somebody said that Michael Vick wasn't a top 10 black quarterback of all time. And then I was thinking about the list I put together. So, this list is very fluent, but my number one quarterback is Warren Moon. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer. What can you say about it?
Right.
Number two, I put Russell Wilson. I love Russell Wilson.
I do too. Russell Wilson is
love,
my favorite quarterback.
Yeah, and nobody takes what the defense gives him better than Russell Wilson.
Yeah.
Three is Patrick Mahomes, and I think he's just the most talented quarterback of all, this entire list. Number four, I got Steve McNair. Number five I got Donovan McNabb. Number six, I had Deshaun Watson. Like I said, Deshaun Watson, put his legal issue aside, he's a top five quarterback in the league today. Number seven, I had Lamar Jackson. Just so dynamic, and the ceiling is so high for him. Number eight, I didn't have him in originally, and then somebody brought him up, and I was like, yeah, you can't keep Cam Newton out. So Cam Newton is my number eight. Nine, I got Michael Vick, and number 10, I got Randall Cunningham. And the biggest pushback I had was on Doug Williams. Right. And Doug Williams, before I put Cam Newton in my top 10, Doug Williams was my number 10. But if you put somebody in, you got to take somebody out. So Doug Williams is the one I put out.
Yes, sir. And of all the cats that didn't make your list that are currently playing, who do you see that could potentially break into your list?
Somebody mentioned that, and then I had to think about it. One, it will be Dak Prescott. There's no doubt, probably in 2 or 3 years, Dak Prescott would be in that top 10, probably 6 or 7. Kyler Murray is probably another one that's going to be up there. There's no doubt. And like I said, this list could be totally different in 2 years. Okay. Totally different. So,
to swing it around to a different kind of vibe, what quarterbacks can you think of that may have disappointed you a little bit that you thought were going to be something special?
Wow, that's a good question.
Did you ever think of, how did you feel about Jamarcus Russell?
I don't know. I never really saw Jamarcus play a lot in college. I remember the bowl game against Notre Dame, and that's pretty much where he made his name at. Achilles Smith was probably one of them. What was the quarterback that played for the State? About the same time, I can't think of his name, that played really well. Aaron Brooks.
Oh, yeah.
Aaron Brooks. Yeah, and he played really well for about 3 years, and he kind of fell off. There's always going to be disappointment, but those are just a few that just come out.
Yeah, the actual last black quarterback to start for the Giants was Geno Smith when they benched Eli Manning.
Yeah.
Did you ever see any potential in Geno initially?
Even in college, there was time where Geno just didn't play very well. So, I remember he thought he was going to go in the first round, ended up going that second day, and he was kind of disappointed. And there was always some question about Geno.
Yeah. How do you feel about the way Robert Griffin III's career went and Jameis Winston?
That's one. That's probably the one. And you said Jameis?
Yeah, Jameis.
That's the other one you said? And Jameis just turned the ball over too much. He did that at Florida State. Robert Griffin III is probably one, but at the end of the day, it came down to injuries. Injuries is what did it in. So those are the things that. What can you really say when your body just doesn't respond? But I remember the first time I seen Robert Griffin III at Baylor, and I was like, "That's the guy. Right. That's the guy that breaks the mold." You know what I'm saying? Because he can literally do it all.
Yeah, man. So I know you had or earlier, I'll say, you made several times you had commented about Friday turning into Saturday and Saturday turning into Sunday. So what do you think the future looks like at all three levels for black quarterbacks.
It's just going to be brighter because you're just going to get more and more of them. You are getting more kids from Pee Wee. And here's the thing. Let's just, we talked about Michael Vick when he was coming up. And a lot of coaches, even on Friday, took athletes and made them quarterbacks. Now you got quarterbacks that you got athletes just happen to be quarterbacks. Quarterbacks who are athletes. And with all this 7-on-7 that these kids do now, and all the training that they can get now, you're only going to get athletes that are better quarterbacks, who can sit in the pocket, can read defenses, can pick up the blitz, and be taught when to take off, when to hang in that pocket, and things like that. So it's only going to go up from here.
Right. So you mentioned a 7-on-7. Do you think is that the best route for a young black quarterback to make his name, is to go to the 7-on-7 camps and show what he can do?
I mean, absolutely, because that's what you're going to do is start football. I mean, the only way you're going to get better at playing football is playing football. So there's nothing like 11-on-11, but just be able to look at defense, learn the route tree, and learn what defenses are trying to do to you. If it's man, if it's zone, if they playing, cover 2 or 2 under, it doesn't matter. Once you can start seeing this stuff over at 7th, 8th, 9th grade, and just knowing what teams want to do to you, and where to go with the football. Because that's what playing quarterback is knowing where to go with the football. Making sure that every possession ends with a kick. If it's an extra point, field goal, or a punt, that's what you want to do as a quarterback.
Right. Do you think, earlier, before this big wave of black quarterbacks hit, do you think that it was scouts and recruiters were a little afraid to take chances on black quarterbacks to protect their jobs, maybe?
Well, I think there was some of that. I mean, especially when you are talking about some of these big schools that, if you are at a Texas or you're at an Alabama and you have, especially in the South, and you got these big alumni bases and fan bases, and you kind of know who they are. Sure, I'm sure there was a lot of contribution about, we can make this guy everything but the quarterback. He can play any position on that. We just can't make a quarterback because the quarterback is the face of the team. He is the franchise. You know what I'm saying? He is the most visible person on the team. And some people still ain't comfortable with it.
Right. Yeah. Well, things are definitely changing, man, and I think we both agree that the future is bright for black quarterbacks, man, and we just have to wait and see where it goes from here, but it looks like it's only going up, man.
Right.
Yes, sir. Well, anyway, Shawn, man, I think we'll go on and wrap it up right there. Brother, I really appreciate you giving me, a little time and coming on the show, man. And, hopefully I have you back sooner than later and we can do it again, man. But I really appreciate it, brother. You take care, okay?
Hey, man, give me a call anytime. I'd be happy to do it.
All right, brother. We'll talk to you later.